The first time I met the CEO of a billion-dollar company, he already knew my name. The strange part? My own family barely believed I deserved to have one. Just 6 months earlier, my father had stood in our dining room, looked directly at me and said, "You'll never be successful because dreamers don't survive in the real world." Everyone nodded. Nobody argued. At 19 years old, I learned that sometimes the people who know you the longest believe in you the least. My name is Aria Bennett, and this is the story of how the same family that called me a failure had no choice but to watch the CEO they'd spent years trying to impress ask for me by name. But to understand how that happened, you first need to understand what it felt like growing up inside the Bennett family. Success wasn't just important in our house. It was everything. My father, Gregory Bennett, had built a respected construction company from the ground up. He admired discipline, results, hard work, and above all, certainty. If a career didn't guarantee success, he considered it a waste of time. My older brother, Ethan, fit perfectly into that world. At 23, he already worked beside Dad every day. Clients loved him. Employees respected him. Family members constantly praised him. Whenever guests visited our house, Dad proudly introduced Ethan as the future of the Bennett family. Then people would usually look at me. "And what about you, Aria?" I always smiled before answering. "I'm studying digital design." The reaction was almost always the same. A polite smile, a confused nod. Then someone would ask, "So, what kind of real job does that lead to?" I used to laugh along with them. Eventually, it became easier than explaining. The truth was, I wasn't just studying design. Every night after college classes, I spent hours teaching myself coding, animation, user interface design, and mobile application development. I watched tutorials until 2 in the morning. I practiced every single day, not because anyone asked me to, because I loved it. Creating something from nothing gave me a feeling I couldn't explain. Unfortunately, my family couldn't understand that feeling. To them, success meant wearing a hard hat, managing construction sites, signing contracts, not sitting behind a laptop designing digital products. Family dinners became the hardest part of every week. Someone always made a joke. Someone always questioned my future. Someone always reminded me that I was different. One Sunday evening, Dad placed his fork on the table and looked at me. "So, how's the computer hobby going?" "It's going well," I answered. "Hobby?" I smiled politely. "I'd call it a career." Several relatives laughed. Dad smiled. "No, Aria. A career pays your bills. A hobby costs money." The room filled with quiet laughter. I lowered my eyes to my plate. I had heard versions of those words dozens of times before, but somehow they still hurt. What nobody at that table knew was that 3 weeks earlier, I had secretly submitted my portfolio to Vertex Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in North America. I never told anyone, not because I expected to get accepted, because I didn't want another reason to be laughed at if I failed. So I kept working, kept learning, kept believing, completely unaware that somewhere inside Vertex Dynamics headquarters, someone very important had just opened my portfolio. And before this story was over, that decision would completely change the way my family looked at me. For the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about Vertex Dynamics. Every morning, I checked my email before getting out of bed. Every night, I checked it again before going to sleep. Nothing. No rejection. No interview. No update. Just silence. Slowly, I convinced myself that my portfolio had probably been ignored like so many others. Life returned to normal. College during the day. A part-time job at a neighborhood coffee shop in the evenings. then hours of studying design and coding late into the night. My schedule was exhausting, but every new project reminded me why I had started. I wasn't trying to prove my family wrong. I was trying to prove myself right. One Saturday afternoon, I sat in my room redesigning the interface for a budgeting app one had created. My laptop was covered in sticky notes. Sketches covered my desk. Coffee cups sat everywhere. Just then, my father knocked on the door. Without waiting for an answer, he walked in. He looked around the room. "So this is what you've been doing every weekend?" I nodded. "I'm improving my portfolio." He picked up one of my sketches. "What exactly is this?" "It's a mobile banking interface." He stared at it for a few seconds before placing it back on the desk. "I don't understand any of it." "You don't have to. I understand enough." He crossed his arms. "You're spending hundreds of hours on something that isn't making you a single dollar." I stayed quiet. He sighed. "Aria, I'm saying this because I'm your father. You need a real plan." "I have one." He shook his head. "No, you have hope. Those are two different things." Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "The construction company needs another office assistant. The position is yours if you want it." I knew what that offer really meant. Not opportunity, surrender. If I accepted, my dream would quietly disappear. "I appreciate it, but I'm going to keep trying." He looked disappointed. "I was afraid you'd say that." The door closed behind him. For a few moments, I simply stared at my computer screen. His words echoed in my mind. Hope isn't a plan. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being unrealistic. But every time I imagined giving up, something inside me refused. The following Monday, I was working at the coffee shop when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored unknown calls while working. Something told me not to this time. "Hello. May I speak with Aria Bennett?" "This is Aria." "Hi, Aria. My name is Melissa Carter from Vertex Dynamics." Everything around me disappeared. The sound of customers, the coffee machines, the conversations, all of it faded into the background. My heart was beating so loudly I could barely hear her voice. "We've been reviewing your portfolio." I held my breath. "And we'd like to invite you to our headquarters for an interview." For several seconds I couldn't speak. "I'm sorry. I think I heard you wrong." She laughed softly. "No, you heard correctly." I leaned against the counter, trying not to collapse. "We were impressed with your work. There are several people here who would like to meet you." After writing down the interview details, I thanked her at least 5 times. The moment the call ended, I rushed outside. I stood alone in the parking lot. Then I cried. Not because I had the job. I didn't. Not yet. I cried because, for the very first time, someone in the industry had looked at my work instead of my age. Someone had judged my talent instead of my last name. That evening, I told my mother. She smiled. "I'm proud of you." It was the first time she'd ever said those words about my dream. When my father came home, she excitedly shared the news. He listened quietly. Then he shrugged. "It's just an interview. Don't celebrate too early." I nodded. Maybe he was right. Maybe nothing would come from it. But deep inside, I had a feeling that one interview was about to change everything. Because I wasn't just going to meet a hiring manager. Without realizing it, I was about to meet the person who would completely rewrite my future. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was afraid of failing, because I couldn't believe I had actually been invited. For years, my family had treated my dream like a childish fantasy. Now, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in North America wanted to see my work. At 6 that morning, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my blazer for what felt like the 100th time. I wanted to look professional, confident, capable, even if I didn't completely feel that way. As I walked downstairs, my mother smiled. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." She handed me a small lunch bag. "I know you'll probably be nervous enough to forget to eat." I hugged her. She had always been quieter than everyone else, but sometimes the smallest acts of support meant the most. My father walked into the kitchen, carrying a cup of coffee. He looked at me for a moment. "So, today's the interview." I nodded. "It is." He took a sip of coffee. "Remember, big companies interview hundreds of people. Don't get your hopes too high." I forced a smile. "I won't." But his words followed me all the way to the train station. Don't get your hopes too high. When I finally arrived at Vertex Dynamics headquarters, I stopped walking. The building was incredible. 40 floors of glass and steel reflected the morning sunlight. Employees hurried through the entrance, carrying laptops and coffee cups. Everything looked so important. For a second, I wondered if I belonged there at all. Then I remembered every late night, every rejection, every project, every sacrifice. I walked inside. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "You must be Aria Bennett." I smiled. "Yes, we've been expecting you." Those 4 words somehow calmed my nerves. A few minutes later, I was escorted to a conference room overlooking the city. 3 interviewers were already waiting: a design director, a senior developer, and the head of product innovation. For the next hour, they asked about everything: my portfolio, my creative process, how I solved design problems, why I made certain decisions. Unlike my family, nobody laughed, nobody rolled their eyes, nobody called my work a hobby. Instead, they listened. They asked thoughtful questions. They challenged my ideas. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was being treated as a professional instead of a child. Near the end of the interview, the design director smiled. "Aria, I have one last question." I nodded. "If another company offered you a higher salary tomorrow, why would you choose Vertex Dynamics?" I thought for a moment before answering. I wouldn't choose a company because it pays the most. The room became quiet. I'd choose the company that believes in what I can become. No one spoke for several seconds. Then all 3 interviewers smiled. The interview ended shortly afterward. As I thanked everyone and walked toward the elevator, I felt strangely peaceful. Maybe I'd get the internship. Maybe I wouldn't. But I had proven something important to myself. I belonged in that room. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, someone called my name. "Aria." I turned around. A woman wearing a company badge hurried toward me. "There you are. I've been looking for you." I frowned. "Is everything okay?" She smiled. "Our CEO just arrived unexpectedly." My heart skipped. "Our CEO reviewed your portfolio this morning." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. "I'm sorry, what?" "He'd like to meet you." I stared at her in complete disbelief. "The CEO?" She nodded. "Yes, if you have a few extra minutes." My hand suddenly felt cold. The CEO of a billion-dollar company wanted to meet me? I had come expecting an internship interview. Now, I was about to walk into the office of one of the most influential people in the entire technology industry, and I had absolutely no idea that the next conversation would change the course of my life forever. I followed the assistant down a long hallway. Every step made my heart beat faster. The walls were covered with framed awards, magazine covers, and photographs of products that had changed millions of people's lives. This wasn't just another company. This was where ideas became reality. The assistant stopped outside a large office. She smiled. He's expecting you. I nodded nervously. She knocked twice. A calm voice answered. Come in. The office was surprisingly simple. No expensive decorations. No oversized desk. Just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and shelves filled with books. Standing beside the window was a man in his early 50s. He turned around with a warm smile. Aria Bennett. I couldn't believe he already knew my name. Yes, sir. He extended his hand. I'm Daniel Carter, the CEO of Vertex Dynamics. His handshake was firm but friendly. Please have a seat. I sat down, trying to hide how nervous I was. He noticed immediately. You don't need to be nervous. I've already seen your work. That surprised me. My portfolio. He nodded. Twice. I actually reviewed it again this morning. For a second, I forgot how to speak. Out of thousands of applicants, the CEO himself had reviewed my work. He picked up a tablet from his desk. I want to show you something. He opened one of my interface designs. This screen. He zoomed in. Why did you arrange the navigation this way? I explained my reasoning. The user experience, accessibility, reducing unnecessary steps. He listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, he smiled. That's exactly what our senior designers said. I blinked. They did. They were impressed. He set the tablet down. Aria, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Who taught you to think like this? I smiled. No one. I learned through online courses, books, practice, and a lot of mistakes. He laughed. That's usually the best teacher. For nearly 40 minutes, we talked about design, creativity, technology, and solving real-world problems. Not once did he ask my age. Not once did he question whether my dream was realistic. He only cared about one thing. Could I create something valuable? When the conversation ended, he stood and walked toward the window. You know. He folded his arms. People often think companies hire resumes. He turned toward me. They don't. We hire people who solve problems. Then he looked directly into my eyes. And I believe you're one of those people. I felt my throat tighten. No one had ever said something like that to me before, especially not someone like him. He returned to his desk and opened a folder. Inside was a document with the company's logo. He slid it across the table. I'd like you to read this. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The title immediately caught my attention. Employment offer. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. Surely this couldn't be happening. I hadn't even left the building yet. Daniel smiled. We usually don't make decisions this quickly. But sometimes. He paused. Waiting doesn't make sense. I slowly read through the offer. It wasn't just an internship. It was a full-time junior product designer position after graduation, complete with a paid internship, personal mentorship, relocation assistance, and a salary that was larger than my father earned in a year. I looked up in complete shock. I don't know what to say. He smiled. Say yes. A small laugh escaped before I could stop it. Yes. I'd love to. He reached across the desk and shook my hand again. Welcome to Vertex Dynamics, Aria. As I walked out of the building that afternoon, the city somehow looked different, brighter, larger, full of possibilities. I couldn't wait to tell my family, especially my father. Maybe, just maybe, this would finally make him proud. What I didn't know was that my father wouldn't be the first person to hear about my new job, because early the next morning, the CEO would walk into a meeting with one of our biggest construction clients, see a familiar last name on the guest list, and ask a question that would leave an entire room speechless. Is Gregory Bennett related to Aria Bennett? The next morning, my father arrived at one of the biggest construction conferences in the state. For him, it was just another business meeting. For me, it was my first official day as a paid intern at Vertex Dynamics. Neither of us had any idea our worlds were about to collide. My father sat inside the conference room with several construction executives, waiting for the presentation to begin. Vertex Dynamics had recently announced a new AI-powered project management platform for construction companies. Their CEO, Daniel Carter, was giving the keynote speech. Dad had been trying to schedule a meeting with Vertex for months. He saw it as an opportunity to grow the family business. The lights dimmed. Daniel Carter walked onto the stage. The audience applauded. Dad smiled. "This could be good for us," he whispered to the manager sitting beside him. After a 30-minute presentation, Daniel invited several company owners into a smaller networking session. My father's company happened to be one of them. Inside the meeting room, introductions began. One by one, business owners shook Daniel's hand. Then it was my father's turn. Gregory Bennett. Daniel smiled politely. "Bennett." He paused for a second. Then his expression changed. "I'm sorry. Are you related to Aria Bennett?" The room became completely silent. Dad looked surprised. "She's—" He cleared his throat. "My daughter." Daniel's face immediately lit up. "Your daughter?" "She's one of the most talented young designers I've met in years." Dad stared at him, clearly unsure how to respond. Daniel continued, "Honestly, we're lucky she accepted our offer." Several executives looked toward my father. One of them smiled. "You must be incredibly proud." Dad forced a smile. "Of course. But I wasn't there to see what happened next." Daniel laughed. "You know, when Aria showed us her portfolio, the entire design team stopped what they were doing. We knew immediately she was special." Another executive nodded. "I've heard great things about her already." The compliments kept coming. Dad simply stood there, listening. The same man who had called me a failure only days earlier was now hearing some of the most respected people in the industry praise me. Then Daniel asked the question that changed everything. "So, what inspired Aria to become such an outstanding designer?" Dad opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because he didn't know. He didn't know about the hundreds of late nights, the online courses, the countless rejections, the weekends I spent building projects while everyone else was relaxing. He knew almost nothing about the dream he had spent years criticizing. Daniel smiled politely. "You should ask her. She tells the story much better than I ever could." The meeting ended shortly afterward. That evening, I returned home carrying my employee welcome package. As I opened the front door, I found my father sitting alone in the living room. He looked different, quieter, older somehow. He looked up as I walked in. "Can we talk?" I nodded. He took a deep breath. "Today, I met your CEO." I smiled. "I know." He told me. Dad lowered his eyes. He said something that I can't stop thinking about. I stayed quiet. He said, "Your daughter earned this because she never stopped believing in herself." The room fell silent. Then, for the first time in my entire life, my father apologized. "I'm sorry, Aria. I spent years judging a dream I never tried to understand. I called you a failure, when the truth is, I failed to believe in my own daughter." Tears filled my eyes, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because those were the words I had waited my whole life to hear. I walked over and hugged him. Neither of us spoke. Some wounds don't disappear overnight, but healing has to start somewhere. Months later, people often asked me what the best part of working at Vertex Dynamics was. Some expected me to say the salary. Others guessed it was meeting the CEO. They were all wrong. The best part wasn't the contract. It wasn't the office. It wasn't even the success. The best part was finally realizing that someone else's opinion never had the power to define my future. Because sometimes, the people who call you a failure simply can't imagine a future bigger than the one they built for themselves. And that's okay. Your job isn't to make them believe in your dream. Your job is to believe in it yourself, until the world has no choice but to notice.